Arizona, 1944. The desert night is cold, far colder than anyone expects. A military truck rumbles down a dirt road, headlights cutting through darkness, dust rising in ghostly clouds behind worn tires. Inside the canvas-covered bed, 23 women sit in silence, their bodies swaying with each bump and turn. They wear mismatched clothing, some still in the remnants of auxiliary uniforms, others in donated civilian clothes that hang loose on frames thinned by months of uncertainty. Their hands grip the wooden benches, their eyes stare forward, seeing nothing, or perhaps seeing everything they fear is coming. Among them sits Maria Benedetti, 23 years old, a nurse from a small village outside Palermo. Her dark hair is tied back with a fraying ribbon. Her hands, once soft from tending wounds and holding the hands of dying soldiers, are now calloused and rough. She has not slept in a real bed in over a year. She has slept on straw that crawled with insects, on dirt floors in holding facilities, on the cold concrete of a ship's hold during the endless crossing of the Atlantic. She learned to sleep sitting up, back against a wall, always alert, always expecting the worst. The propaganda had been clear. Americans were brutal, they were savage, they had no honor, no respect for women, no mercy for enemies. Every rumor whispered through the transit camps painted the same picture. Prisoners would be worked to death in desert labor camps. They would be beaten. The women feared worse. Maria had heard the stories, had seen the terror in other women's eyes when the subject came up. No one said it directly, but the fear lived in the silence between words. When Sicily fell in the summer of 1943, Maria had been working at a field hospital near Catania. The Allied bombardment had been relentless. Buildings collapsed, roads disappeared under rubble. The hospital itself was hit twice, the second time destroying the surgical wing where she had just been standing minutes before. When the American and British troops pushed through, there was no escape. She and dozens of other medical personnel were rounded up, hands raised, white flags fluttering from windows. She remembers the strange politeness of the British sergeant who processed them, the way he called her Miss, even as he confiscated her medical bag. She remembers thinking it must be a trick. Italy's surrender came on September 8, 1943. Maria heard the news while detained in a holding facility in North Africa. At first, it felt like relief. The war was over. They could go home. But the reality was far more complicated. Italy was no longer an enemy, but not quite an ally. The new term was co-belligerent, a word that meant everything and nothing. German forces still occupied the north. The country was split, broken, confused. And she, along with thousands of other Italian military personnel and auxiliaries, remained prisoners, not enemies. Anymore, technically, but not free either. The journey to America had taken weeks. First, by ship to England, crammed below decks with hundreds of other prisoners, then transferred to a larger vessel bound for the United States, sailing west into a future she could not imagine. During that crossing, Maria slept on the floor, her head resting on a canvas bag containing everything she owned in the world: one change of clothes, a small crucifix her mother had given her, and a photograph of her family standing in front of their stone house, squinting in the Sicilian sun. She wondered if that house still stood. She wondered if they were still alive. Other women shared their fears in whispers. Francesca, a radio operator from Milan, was convinced they would be sent to factories, forced to make weapons that would be used against their own countrymen still fighting in the north. Julia, a clerk from Rome, believed they would be left to die in the desert, forgotten. Anna, barely 19, cried at night, convinced she would never see Italy again. Maria tried to comfort them, but her own fear was a stone in her chest. She was a nurse. She had seen what war did to bodies. She knew what men were capable of when they stopped seeing other people as human. The American guards on the ship were strange. They did not hit. They did not shout. They brought food, plain but edible. When one of the women became ill with fever, they brought a medic who actually treated her. Maria watched this with suspicion. It had to be for show. Surely when they reached land, when there were no witnesses, the truth would reveal itself. The truck slows now, gears grinding, then stops. Maria hears voices outside, English words she does not fully understand. The engine cuts off. In the sudden silence, she can hear the wind, the distant call of some night bird, and her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The canvas flap at the back of the truck pulls open. Cold air rushes in. A flashlight beam sweeps across their faces. A woman in a U.S. Army uniform stands there, her expression neutral, but not cruel. Behind her, another guard, also female, waits with a clipboard. The first woman speaks in slow, careful English. When no one responds, she tries again in broken Italian. Venite. Come. Follow. The women climb down from the truck, legs stiff, movements hesitant. Maria's boots hit the hard-packed earth. She looks around. There are buildings, low and rectangular, arranged in neat rows. Floodlights illuminate the compound. There's a fence, yes, with wire along the top, but it is not the nightmare of barbed wire and guard towers she had imagined. It looks almost ordinary, like a military base. There are other women here too, she realizes. She can see them through the windows of one building, moving about freely. No chains, no visible violence. They are led toward one of the barracks. The female guard opens the door and gestures for them to enter. Maria goes first, because someone has and because she has learned that waiting only prolongs the fear. She steps through the doorway into light and warmth. The air inside smells clean, not the smell of unwashed bodies and despair she has grown accustomed to, but something else, soap, fresh laundry. And then she sees them, the beds, rows of metal-framed beds, maybe 30 or 40 in this room alone, each one made up with precision. White sheets tucked tight, gray wool blankets folded at the foot, thin pillows in white pillowcases. Everything is clean. Everything is whole. There are no holes in the sheets, no stains, no tears. They are not luxurious. They are simple, military-issue beds. But to Maria, who has not seen a clean sheet in over a year, who has not slept on a mattress, who has learned to curl into herself on cold, hard surfaces and call it rest, they are impossible. Something breaks inside her. She cannot explain it, cannot put words to the feeling. It is not relief, it is not gratitude, it is something deeper, more primal. It is the realization that she has been living like an animal, that she had accepted this as her fate, and now, confronted with this simple evidence of human dignity, she cannot hold herself together anymore. The tears come suddenly, violently. She covers her face with her hands, but the sobs shake her whole body. Behind her, Francesca gasps, then she too begins to cry. Within seconds, nearly all of them are weeping. Some sink to their knees, others stand frozen, tears streaming down their faces, staring at those white sheets as if they are seeing something holy. Julia touches one of the beds with trembling fingers, then pulls her hand back as if burned. Anna collapses onto the nearest mattress and weeps into the pillow, her whole body convulsing with the force of emotions she can no longer contain. The American guards look at each other, confused. The one with the clipboard takes a step forward, alarm in her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asks in English, then tries again in her limited Italian. "Cosa? What?" Maria tries to answer, but she cannot speak. How can she explain this to someone who has never lost her humanity? How can she make someone understand what it means to be given back something you did not even realize you had lost? These are just beds. These are just sheets. But they are also proof that she is still human, still worthy of basic dignity, still someone who deserves to sleep on something clean. One of the guards leaves quickly, returning moments later with an older woman in an officer's uniform. This woman surveys the scene, her expression shifting from confusion to something else. Understanding, perhaps, or pity. She speaks quietly to the guards, then turns to the prisoners. In fluent Italian, she says, "You are safe here. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will not be harmed." Some of the women look up, faces wet with tears, eyes searching hers for deception. But the officer's voice is steady, calm, not harsh. She gestures to the beds. "These are yours. Each woman gets one bed. You will receive linens, blankets, towels, and personal items tomorrow. There is a washroom at the end of the hall with hot water. You may bathe tonight if you wish. Dinner was hours ago, but we can bring sandwiches and coffee." Maria finally finds her voice. "Why?" The word comes out broken. "Why are you doing this?" The officer looks at her for a long moment. "Because," she says simply, "this is how we treat people." The confusion only deepens. This is not what they were told. This is not what they expected. They were prepared for cruelty, for degradation, for suffering. They were prepared to endure, to survive, to cling to whatever shreds of dignity they could hide in their hearts. They were not prepared for clean sheets. They were not prepared for kindness. Slowly, hesitantly, the women begin to move. They choose beds, some clustering together, others seeking corners. Maria sits on the edge of her assigned bed, running her hand across the white sheet. It is crisp, cool, clean. She lies back carefully, as if the mattress might disappear if she moves too quickly. The pillow cradles her head. The springs creak softly beneath her weight. She stares up at the wooden ceiling, tears still sliding down her temples into her hair. Around her, other women are doing the same. Some have removed their shoes and are lying fully clothed on top of the blankets, afraid perhaps to get the linens dirty with their unwashed bodies. Others sit hunched on the edges of their beds, faces in their hands. Francesca whispers a prayer. Julia laughs suddenly, a broken, desperate sound. "We are crying over beds," she says to no one and everyone. "We have lost everything, and we are crying over beds." But it is not just beds. Maria understands this even if she cannot articulate it. It is the recognition that they are still human beings. It is the first crack in the wall of lies they have been told about America, about the enemy, about their own worth. It is the beginning of something they had not anticipated. Doubt. Doubt in the propaganda. Doubt in the certainty of their worldview. Doubt in everything they thought they knew about the nation that had defeated them. The guards bring sandwiches, as promised. Thick slices of bread with meat and cheese inside, more food than Maria has seen at one time in months. There is coffee, hot and bitter but real. There are apples, shiny and red. The women eat slowly, reverently, still crying, still trying to understand what is happening to them. That night, Maria lies in her clean bed under her clean sheet and her wool blanket, and she cannot sleep. Not because she is uncomfortable, but because she is too comfortable. Her body does not know how to rest like this anymore. She has forgotten what it feels like to be warm, to be clean, to lie on something soft. Around her, she hears the sounds of other women also awake, shifting, sighing, occasionally, weeping quietly in the darkness. She thinks about home. She thinks about her mother and father, her two brothers, her grandmother. Are they sleeping on beds tonight? Do they have clean sheets? She knows they do not. She knows Italy is starving. She knows the war has stripped everything away from the people she loves. And here she is, a prisoner, sleeping in comfort they cannot imagine. The guilt is sharp and immediate, but beneath the guilt is something else, something small but persistent. A voice that whispers, "If this is how America treats its prisoners, what must it be like to be free here?" She does not know the answer. She does not know what tomorrow will bring, or the day after, or any of the days that stretch ahead of her in this strange, impossible place. But tonight, for the first time in over a year, she sleeps in a bed with clean sheets. And when sleep finally comes, deep in the desert darkness of Arizona, Maria Benedetti dreams of home. Morning came with light filtering through windows that actually had glass, not bars or boards, just clean panes that turned the Arizona sunrise into soft gold. Maria woke disoriented, her body confused by the absence of cold, the presence of softness beneath her. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then it came back. The beds, the sheets, the impossible kindness of the night before. She sat up slowly, looking around at the other women still sleeping or just beginning to stir. Some had not changed position all night, afraid perhaps that moving would break the spell. A bell rang somewhere outside, not harsh or demanding, just a gentle signal. Within minutes, a guard appeared at the door, the same Italian-speaking officer from the night before. "Buongiorno," she said, her accent American but her effort genuine. "Breakfast is in 30 minutes. The washroom has soap and towels. Take your time." Then she was gone, leaving the door open, not locked, not even fully closed. The women looked at each other. Was this real? The washroom was a revelation. 6 sinks with running water, both hot and cold, toilets that flushed, 3 shower stalls with curtains for privacy, bars of white soap, clean and wrapped, towels, thin but clean, stacked on a shelf. Maria stood before a sink and turned the hot water tap. Steam rose. She put her hands under the stream, and felt tears threatening again. Hot water. She had forgotten hot water existed. Francesca stepped up beside her and did the same, and they stood there together, two women who had survived bombings and capture and an ocean crossing, weeping over hot water. When they entered the mess hall, the smell hit them first. Coffee, real coffee, not the burnt chicory substitute they had grown accustomed to. Bread, fresh baked, something frying, eggs maybe, or potatoes. Maria's stomach twisted with hunger so fierce it was painful. They were directed to a line, given metal trays, and then watched in disbelief as American servicewomen served them portions. Scrambled eggs, toast with butter, oatmeal with brown sugar, strips of bacon, coffee with real cream, an orange, bright and impossibly fresh. Maria stared at her tray, unable to move. This was more food than she had seen in a single meal since before the war. This was more food than her family in Sicily had probably seen in a month. The guilt rose like bile in her throat, but hunger was stronger. She sat at one of the long tables and began to eat, slowly at first, then faster, her body taking over, desperate for calories, for sustenance, for life. Around her, other women did the same. Some ate in silence, tears running down their faces. Others ate with a kind of frantic intensity, as if the food might disappear if they did not consume it immediately. Julia made herself sick, eating too much too fast, her stomach no longer accustomed to abundance. The guards brought her water, helped her outside, were gentle. It was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Enemies were not supposed to be gentle. After breakfast, they were assembled in what the Americans called a recreation room. The Italian-speaking officer stood before them, a younger woman beside her with a notepad. "My name is Captain Dorothy Reeves," the officer began. "I am the liaison officer for Italian personnel at this facility. I know you are confused. I know you are frightened. I'm going to explain your situation." She spoke clearly, pausing to let them absorb the information. Italy, she explained, had surrendered to the Allies on September 8, 1943. This they knew. But the situation had grown more complex. The Italian government had declared war on Germany in October of that year, technically becoming a co-belligerent of the Allies. However, Italian military personnel captured before that date remained prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. This was partly for their own protection. German forces still occupied much of Italy. If they were returned home, they might be captured by the Germans and treated as traitors. So they would remain here, in America, until it was safe to return. They would be housed at this facility, a branch camp near Florence, Arizona, part of a larger complex that included camps at Papago Park and several other locations across the state. By the end of 1944, Arizona would hold thousands of prisoners, Germans, Italians, and even some Japanese. But the women, relatively few in number, would be kept separate, housed in this smaller facility with female guards and staff. "You will be treated," Captain Reeves said firmly, "according to the Geneva Convention of 1929. You will be given adequate food, shelter, medical care, and clothing. You will be assigned work appropriate to your skills and health. You will be paid a small wage for your labor, which you may use in the camp canteen. You will be allowed to write letters home, though they will be censored. You will be allowed to attend religious services. You will not be abused. You will not be starved. You will not be tortured. This is not negotiable. This is the law." The women sat in stunned silence. Maria wanted to believe her, but belief required trust, and trust required time. She had been lied to before. They all had. The fascist government had lied. The propaganda had lied. Why should this be different? But then came the medical examinations, and the evidence became harder to ignore. They were taken one by one to a clean infirmary with actual medical equipment. An army doctor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and efficient hands, examined Maria thoroughly. She checked her heart, her lungs, her teeth. She noted the malnutrition, the skin infections, the beginning of scurvy from lack of fresh vegetables during the transit. She prescribed vitamins, ointments, additional food portions to restore weight. She did all of this without disgust, without cruelty, as if Maria were a human being worthy of care. "You are anemic," the doctor said through a translator. "We will give you iron supplements. Your gums are bleeding because of vitamin C deficiency. Eat the citrus fruit at every meal. You have lice. We will treat that today with a special shampoo. You are underweight by approximately 20 pounds. We will adjust your diet to address this." She paused, then added more gently, "You have been through a terrible ordeal. Your body will heal. Give it time." Maria nodded, unable to speak. When she left the infirmary, she had been deloused, given clean undergarments, issued a simple uniform dress in gray cotton, and handed a small paper bag containing a toothbrush, tooth powder, a comb, and sanitary napkins. These small items, things she had lived without for so long, felt like treasures beyond measure. A toothbrush, such a small thing, such a profound dignity. The work assignments came next. Captain Reeves explained that under the Geneva Convention, prisoners could be required to work, but the work must not be dangerous, degrading, or directly related to military operations. The women would work in the camp laundry, in the kitchens preparing meals for the prisoner population, in the infirmary assisting with basic nursing tasks, or in administrative roles if they had clerical skills. Some might be assigned to agricultural work at nearby farms, picking cotton or vegetables if they were physically capable and willing. Maria was assigned to the infirmary. Her nursing experience made her valuable, and the Army doctor had specifically requested her. She would work 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, with Sundays off. She would be paid 80 cents per day, the standard wage for prisoner labor, which amounted to $24 per month. This money could be used at the camp canteen to buy small luxuries, writing paper, stamps, soap, chocolate, cigarettes for those who smoked, even magazines. $24. Maria did a quick mental calculation. That was more money than her father, a stonemason, had made in many months back home during the worst of the war economy. And she was a prisoner. The absurdity of it struck her forcefully. She was a prisoner of war living better than free citizens in her own country. The daily routines quickly established themselves. Réveillé at 6:30, breakfast at 7, work from 8 until noon, lunch, another astonishing meal with meat, vegetables, bread, and coffee, work again from 1 until 5, dinner at 6, then free time until lights out at 10. They could read in the recreation room, where there was a collection of Italian books and magazines. They could write letters, though these had to be submitted unsealed for censorship. They could listen to the radio, which played American music that sounded strange and energetic. They could simply sit and talk, or be alone if they preferred. The letters home were carefully worded, but even with censorship, the truth seeped through. Maria wrote to her mother, "I am safe and well. We have beds to sleep in and food to eat. The Americans are following the rules for prisoners. I am working as a nurse again, helping in the medical clinic. I think of you every day and pray you are safe. Please do not worry for me. I am healthier now than I have been in a long time." She did not say how much healthier. She did not describe the abundance. She was afraid her mother would not believe her, or worse, that she would believe her, and feel the full weight of the contrast between imprisonment in America and freedom in war-torn Italy. Letters arrived from home, too, though irregularly, and often months delayed. The news was never good. Villages bombed, families displaced, food scarce. The Allied advance up the Italian peninsula was slow and brutal. The Germans fought for every mile. Maria read her mother's shaky handwriting describing how they were surviving on chestnuts and whatever vegetables they could grow in the small garden behind their damaged house. How her father's hands shook now from malnutrition. How her youngest brother, only 16, had been taken by the Germans to dig trenches. The contrast between her reality and theirs was unbearable. But gradually, something began to shift in the camp. Trust, fragile and tentative, started to grow. The guards learned a few words of Italian. The prisoners learned more English. One guard, a young woman from New Mexico named Corporal Garcia, brought her guitar one evening and played songs in Spanish, which some of the Italian women could almost understand. They sang together haltingly in different languages, finding harmony anyway. Another guard showed them photographs of her family, her parents who had immigrated from Ireland, shared stories of missing home, offered sympathy that felt genuine. The small kindnesses accumulated like stones building a bridge, extra soap when someone's allotment ran out, a guard who looked the other way when the women stayed up past lights out, talking and comforting each. other after bad news from home. The day Captain Reeves arranged for a Catholic priest to come and say Mass in Italian, and half the women wept through the entire service, overcome by the familiarity of the Latin words and the comfort of ritual. The time Francesca became ill with pneumonia, and the American doctor sat by her bedside for hours, monitoring her fever, adjusting her treatment, refusing to give up even though Francesca was just a prisoner, just an enemy, just a number in a file. The cultural shock went deeper than material comfort. It was the American informality that bewildered them most. Guards who said please and thank you, officers who listened to suggestions from enlisted women, the absence of rigid hierarchy in daily interactions. Maria watched a captain and a private joking together over coffee, easy and natural, and could not square this with everything she had been taught about discipline and order. In Italy, under fascism, such familiarity between ranks would have been unthinkable. Here, it seemed normal, and the abundance. Even in wartime, even with rationing, America overflowed. The camp canteen sold candy bars for 5 cents, Coca-Cola in bottles for a nickel, fresh fruit, more varieties than Maria had names for. The prisoners whispered among themselves, trying to understand. How could a nation at war, fighting on 2 fronts, still have so much? How could they afford to feed prisoners like this when surely their own citizens must be suffering? But the American guards, when asked, seemed genuinely confused by the question. Suffering, Corporal Garcia had replied when Julia asked. Well, there's rationing, sure. Sugar, butter, gasoline. My mom complains about it all the time in her letters, but nobody's starving. We've got plenty. The casual certainty in her voice was more unsettling than any propaganda. She truly believed it, and the evidence suggested she was right. Maria worked in the infirmary and saw the same pattern. Supplies were abundant. Medications that had been worth their weight in gold in Sicily were here stored in large cabinets, used freely. Bandages, sulfa drugs, morphine for pain, insulin for diabetics. The waste troubled her. She saw a nurse throw away a partial roll of gauze because it had been unrolled too far. In Sicily, they would have boiled and reused that gauze until it fell apart. Here, there was simply more. The psychological impact of all this was profound and disorienting. Maria had been trained by war and by fascist ideology to accept suffering as noble, scarcity as inevitable, hierarchy as natural, and cruelty as strength. But here, in this prisoner of war camp in the Arizona desert, she encountered a different set of values. Comfort was not weakness. Kindness was not deception. Informality was not chaos. And abundance, she was beginning to understand, was not an accident, but a choice. A system, a way of organizing society that produced different results than what she had known. The other women were experiencing the same transformation. They gathered in the evenings, sitting on their clean beds in their clean clothes, and talked in low voices about what it all meant. Some clung to their old beliefs, insisting this was propaganda, a show meant to deceive them. But as the weeks turned into months, that position became harder to maintain. The consistency of the treatment, the daily accumulation of small dignities, the simple fact that they were gaining weight and healing and being treated like human beings, all of it wore away at the old certainties. Francesca said it one night, lying in the dark after lights out. What if we were wrong about everything? Her voice was small, frightened. What if they lied to us about all of it? No one answered immediately. The question was too large, too dangerous. To admit they had been lied to meant admitting they had been fools. It meant questioning everything they had believed, everything they had been taught, every sacrifice they had made for a cause that had fed them lies. But the question hung in the air, persistent and unavoidable, because the evidence was all around them, in the clean sheets, in the hot water, in the orange Maria had eaten that morning, sweet and impossible, in the simple revolutionary fact that their captors treated them as if their lives had value. Maria lay in her bed and thought about the doctor who had spent hours saving Francesca's life. She thought about Captain Reeves, who spoke to them with respect even though she did not have to. She thought about Corporal Garcia, who played her guitar and smiled. She thought about the clean sheets that had made her cry that first night, and she thought about home, about Italy, about the ruins and the hunger and the endless suffering, and she began, slowly, painfully, to understand that the world was more complicated than she had been told, that maybe, just maybe, there were different ways to live, different values to hold, different kinds of strength than the one she had been taught to worship. The transformation was not complete. Trust was still fragile. Fear still lurked in corners. But something fundamental had shifted in those first weeks in Arizona. The Italian women who had arrived expecting brutality, who had cried over clean sheets because they had forgotten such things existed, were beginning to see their captors not as enemies but as people. Flawed, complicated people, certainly, but people who, for reasons the prisoners did not yet fully understand, had decided that even enemies deserved dignity. And that decision, more than any battle or treaty, would change everything. The work became routine, and routine became a kind of healing. Maria reported to the infirmary each morning at 8, where she assisted the American medical staff with everything from taking temperatures to changing bandages to comforting patients who spoke no English. The other Italian prisoners made up most of the patient population, women suffering from lingering effects of malnutrition, dental problems, minor injuries from work assignments. But occasionally there were others too, German prisoners transferred from other facilities for specialized care, or even American servicewomen stationed at the camp who needed treatment. Maria found it strange at first, tending to all of them in the same space, enemies and allies and everything in between, all reduced to their common humanity by illness or injury. The infirmary became her sanctuary. Here, she was not a prisoner, but a nurse again, using skills that had defined her before the war stole everything. The American doctor, Captain Helen Morrison, treated her as a colleague rather than a subordinate. She asked Maria's opinion on treatments, listened to her observations about patients, taught her new techniques that American medicine had developed. One afternoon, Captain Morrison showed Maria how to administer penicillin, the miracle drug that was saving lives on battlefields and in hospitals across the war zones. In Sicily, Maria had watched soldiers die from infected wounds that this medication could have cured in days. Now she was learning to use it herself in a prison camp on people who had been designated enemies of the state that invented it. The other women found similar rhythms in their work. Francesca, recovered from her pneumonia, worked in the camp laundry. She told Maria one evening that she had never seen so many machines in her life. Industrial washers and dryers that could process hundreds of pounds of linens each day. In her village outside Milan, laundry had meant hauling water from a well, heating it over a fire, scrubbing by hand, hanging everything to dry in the sun or by the stove in winter. Here, she pushed buttons and added soap and watched machines do in hours what would have taken her days. The efficiency was almost frightening. Julia worked in the kitchens, helping prepare meals for the camp population. She learned to cook American food, strange dishes with unfamiliar spices, something called chili, thick with beans and meat and peppers that burned her tongue, cornbread, sweet and crumbly, apple pie, which seemed to be a national obsession. She wrote to her sister in Rome, describing these foods, and wondered if her sister would even believe her. The quantities alone were absurd. In one afternoon, they would use more sugar than her family would have seen in a year. Some of the women worked outside the camp, transported under guard to nearby farms where labor was desperately needed. Anna, young and strong despite everything, picked cotton in fields that stretched to the horizon. The work was backbreaking, hot, endless. But the farmers paid the government for the labor, and the prisoners received their wages, and at the end of the day they returned to beds with clean sheets and meals with meat and coffee. Anna tried to hate it, tried to resent the arrangement, but found she could not. The American farmers treated her with a kind of rough courtesy. They provided water and shade breaks. They did not curse at her or push her beyond what was reasonable. One farmer's wife brought out cookies one afternoon, homemade and still warm, and handed them out to the work crew as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Anna ate her cookie and cried, and the farmer's wife patted her shoulder and said something in English that Anna did not understand, but that sounded kind. The breakthrough came through language. Captain Reeves organized English classes 3 evenings a week, taught by volunteers from the camp staff and some local school teachers who came in specifically for this purpose. Maria attended faithfully. She had picked up fragments of English during her months of captivity, but now she wanted to understand properly, to communicate without always needing a translator, to grasp the nuances of what people were saying to her. The classes started with basics: colors, numbers, common phrases. Hello, thank you, please, I don't understand. But they progressed quickly because the women were motivated. Language was power. Language was connection. Language was the bridge between their old world and this bewildering new one. As Maria's English improved, conversations deepened. Corporal Garcia, the guard from New Mexico, began talking with her during breaks in the infirmary. Garcia's grandparents had come from Mexico, she explained. Her family spoke Spanish at home, English at school and work. She understood what it meant to live between two languages, two cultures, two ways of seeing the world. She told Maria about growing up in Albuquerque, about discrimination her family had faced, about the complexity of being American, but not quite accepted as fully American by everyone. Maria listened and recognized something familiar, the feeling of being caught between identities, of not quite belonging anywhere. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. A priest arrived from Phoenix, Father Antonio Russo, himself the son of Italian immigrants from Calabria. He celebrated Mass in Latin, as was proper, but he spoke to the women in Italian, in the dialect of the South that Maria had grown up hearing. After the service, he stayed for hours talking with them, listening to their stories, offering comfort that went beyond religious platitude. He understood. His parents had left Italy decades earlier, seeking a better life in America. They had worked hard, faced prejudice, built something from nothing. And now their son was a priest, educated, respected, successful. He represented a possibility the women had not considered, that Italy and America did not have to be enemies, that Italian identity and American opportunity could coexist, that there was a future beyond the ruins of the war. Through Father Russo, connections formed with the Italian-American community in Phoenix and the surrounding towns. Families began to reach out. Not everyone was comfortable with this. There was still a war on. There were still American boys dying in Italy, fighting the Germans who occupied the North. But many Italian Americans felt a pull of kinship, a desire to help these women who spoke their parents' language, who came from the same villages and regions their families had left behind. They sent care packages, homemade pasta, olive oil somehow obtained despite rationing, letters written in Italian offering encouragement. Some even visited on designated days, bringing news and comfort and a reminder that Italy was more than just the war, more than just the devastation. One woman, Mrs. Luciana DeMarco from Tucson, became a regular visitor. Her parents had emigrated from Sicily in 1908. She had never seen the island herself but had grown up hearing stories. When she learned that Maria was from outside Palermo, she wept and embraced her as if they were family. In some way, they were. Mrs. DeMarco brought Italian newspapers, months old but precious. She brought photographs of Sicily from before the war. She brought the music of home, records that she played on a phonograph during her visits. Listening to those Sicilian songs, Maria felt something break open inside her, a homesickness so profound it was physical pain. But it was also healing, to be seen, to be known, to be connected to home even while imprisoned thousands of miles away. The complexity of their status gnawed at them constantly. They were enemy aliens who were not quite enemies anymore. Italy was now technically fighting alongside the Allies, but no one quite knew what that meant for prisoners captured before the shift. Were they still prisoners of war? Were they allies? Were they something in between? The paperwork said POW, but the treatment suggested something more complicated. They had more privileges than the German prisoners in nearby camps. They received more visitors. They were spoken of differently, but they were still behind fences, still monitored, still not free. And always, hanging over everything, was the news from home. Letters arrived irregularly, often taking months to reach Arizona from Italy. Each one brought fresh pain. Maria learned that her childhood home had been destroyed in a bombing raid, that her grandmother had died during the winter, weakened by malnutrition and cold, that her younger brother, the one taken by the Germans to dig trenches, was missing. Probably dead, her mother wrote in shaky handwriting, but we still pray. Reading these letters while sitting in a comfortable room, wearing clean clothes, knowing that dinner would be substantial and good, created a guilt that was almost unbearable. Francesca received word that her entire neighborhood in Milan had been leveled. Her parents had survived but were living in the rubble of their basement, scavenging for food, burning furniture for warmth. Giulia's sister wrote that their father had been killed by partisans who thought he was a fascist collaborator, which he was not. He had simply been a clerk, trying to survive, but in the chaos and hatred of occupied Italy, such distinctions no longer mattered. Anna learned that her mother had died of starvation, just stopped eating, gave her portions to the younger children, and faded away. The women gathered on their beds at night and shared these horrors in whispers. They cried together, they comforted each other, and they struggled with the impossible contradiction of their existence. How could they be here, safe and fed and healing, while their families suffered unimaginable deprivation? Some stopped eating in solidarity, a futile gesture that solved nothing. Captain Morrison had to intervene, explaining gently but firmly that their suffering would not ease the suffering of those at home, that their health was important, that survival was not a betrayal. The guilt was heavy, but the bonds between the prisoners became their salvation. These women, thrown together by circumstance, became family. They celebrated each other's small victories. When Maria received a letter confirming that her parents were alive, the entire barracks rejoiced. When Francesca learned enough English to read an American magazine without help, they applauded. When Giulia's 25th birthday came, they pooled their canteen money to buy her chocolate and a small bottle of perfume, luxuries that felt sinful and necessary at once. These small joys were acts of resistance against despair, assertions that life was still worth living even when the world was ending. Then came May 8, 1945, the day the war in Europe ended. Germany had surrendered. Hitler was dead. The fighting was over. The news came through on the radio, and the American guards cheered and embraced, and the German prisoners in the nearby camps fell into stunned silence. For the Italian women, the moment was impossibly complex. Relief, yes. The dying would stop. But what now? What did victory mean for them? Italy had not won anything. The country was destroyed, occupied, broken. The Allied victory was also Italian defeat, or Italian salvation, or both, or neither. It was too complicated to process. Captain Reeves assembled them that evening and tried to explain what would happen next. Repatriation, she said. They would be sent home as soon as arrangements could be made. Ships had to be organized. Italy had to be stabilized enough to receive them. It might take weeks or months, but they would go home. The war was over. They were no longer needed as prisoner labor. They could return to their families, to their country, to whatever remained of their lives. The room was silent. No one cheered. Maria looked around at the other women and saw her own confusion reflected in their faces. Home. They wanted to go home. Of course they wanted to go home. But home was rubble and hunger and grief. Home was a place where they would struggle to survive. Here, in this prison camp in Arizona, they had beds and food and work, and a kind of peace they had not known in years. The realization was shameful and true. Part of them did not want to leave. That night, lying in her bed for perhaps the last time, Maria thought about everything that had happened since that first night when she had cried over clean sheets. She had arrived broken, expecting brutality, prepared to endure. Instead, she had found something that challenged every assumption she had carried. She had found efficiency and abundance. She had found kindness that was not weakness. She had found people who treated even their enemies with a dignity that seemed almost radical in its consistency. She had learned that strength could be quiet, that power did not require cruelty, that prosperity was not just for the few, but could be broadly shared. She thought about Captain Morrison, who had treated her as an equal, about Corporal Garcia, who had shared her music and her stories, about Mrs. DeMarco, who had embraced a stranger because of a shared heritage, about Father Russo, who had shown her that Italian and American were not mutually exclusive identities, about all the small kindnesses, the accumulated courtesies, the daily evidence that a different way of living was possible. And she thought about what she would tell her family when she returned, How could she explain this experience? How could she make them understand that she had been a prisoner who lived better than free citizens, not because America was cruel to its own people, but because it was simply that abundant? How could she describe the waste she had witnessed, the casual plenty, the assumption that there would always be more? How could she convey the psychological shift that had occurred in her, the way her understanding of the world had been fundamentally altered? She did not have answers, but she knew that she was not the same woman who had arrived in the desert night, terrified and prepared for the worst. She had been transformed by this captivity, shaped by it in ways she was only beginning to understand. The clean sheets had been just the beginning. The real gift had been the restoration of her humanity, the daily reinforcement that she was a person worthy of dignity. That gift could not be taken away, could not be lost in the journey home. It would be part of her forever, a lens through which she would see everything that came after. Around her, other women lay awake with their own thoughts, processing their own transformations. They had survived the war. They had survived captivity. But more than that, they had encountered a different way of being in the world, and that encounter would mark them for the rest of their lives. Tomorrow or next week or next month, they would board ships and sail back to Italy. They would return to the ruins and begin the impossible work of rebuilding. But they would carry with them the memory of this place, these people, this unexpected chapter where they learned that even in war, even in captivity, humanity could survive. And that lesson, perhaps, was worth more than all the clean sheets and hot water and abundant food combined. It was the seed of a different future, planted in the most unlikely soil, waiting to grow. The repatriation did not happen quickly. Summer turned to fall, fall turned to winter, and the Italian women remained in Arizona while military bureaucracy processed paperwork and organized transportation. Ships were needed to bring American troops home first, a priority no one disputed. Then, space had to be found for displaced persons, refugees, and finally for prisoners of war who were no longer quite prisoners, but not yet free citizens either. The waiting was its own kind of torture, suspended between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. During those months, the routines continued. Maria still worked in the infirmary. Francesca still operated the massive laundry machines. Julia still helped prepare American meals in quantities that still astonished her. But everything felt temporary now, fragile, like living in a photograph that was already fading. They were ghosts haunting their own lives, present but not fully there, thinking always of what came next. More letters arrived from Italy, and the news was never good. The country was a catastrophe. Cities destroyed, infrastructure collapsed, economy non-existent. Millions were homeless, living in caves and ruins and makeshift shelters. Starvation was widespread. Disease followed hunger. The government was unstable, trying to rebuild from the ashes of fascism while dealing with the presence of Allied occupying forces and the bitter divisions between those who had supported the regime and those who had resisted it. Reading these letters, Maria felt the weight of what awaited her. She was going home to a country that no longer existed as she remembered it. In January of 1946, the orders finally came. They would leave in February, sailing from New York back across the Atlantic to Naples. The announcement brought no celebration, only a quiet, anxious acceptance. On their last Sunday, Father Russo came to say Mass one final time. His homily was about resilience, about carrying forward, about the duty to rebuild. After the service, he embraced each woman individually, pressing small holy cards into their hands, whispering blessings and encouragement. When he reached Maria, he said softly in Italian, "You have seen something most Italians will never see. You have seen how a different system works. Remember it, share it, help build something better." She nodded, unable to speak. Mrs. DeMarco came to say goodbye, bringing gifts for each woman, small things, practical things, bars of soap, writing paper, pencils, photographs of themselves taken during their captivity so they would have proof that this time had been real. She cried openly, and the women cried with her. "Come back," she urged them, "when things are settled, when you can. Come back to America. There is room here for you. There is opportunity." Some of the women laughed bitterly at this. Who would want them? They were former enemies, former fascists, women with nothing to offer. But Mrs. DeMarco was insistent. "You will see," she said. "America does not hold grudges forever. We believe in second chances." The American staff organized a farewell dinner, a gesture of respect that moved the women deeply. Captain Morrison gave a short speech, her English translated by Captain Reeves. "You came here as prisoners," she said. "You leave as friends. We hope you find peace in your homeland. We hope you find your families safe. We hope the world never again requires such places as this." The irony was not lost on anyone. This prison camp, with its clean sheets and abundant food and respectful treatment, had been a better home than freedom in wartime Italy. What did that say about the world? On the day of departure, the women gathered their few belongings. Maria packed the photographs Mrs. DeMarco had given her, the holy card from Father Russo, letters from her family, and the small bar of soap she had been saving. Everything she owned fit in a single canvas bag. She looked around the barracks one last time, at the beds with their white sheets, and felt tears threatening again. "I will never forget this," Francesca said beside her, and Maria knew she meant not just the room, but everything, the entire impossible experience. The truck ride to the train station, the long train journey east to New York, the processing at the port, all of it passed in a blur. The ship that would carry them home was a converted Liberty ship, nothing like the passenger vessels of peacetime, but it was clean and adequately provisioned. The women stayed together, claiming bunks near each other, needing the solidarity they had built. The crossing took 2 weeks. The Atlantic in February was rough, gray, and cold and unforgiving. Many women were seasick. Maria spent hours on deck when weather permitted, staring at the water, trying to prepare herself for what was coming. They landed at Naples in early March of 1946. The approach to the harbor revealed the scale of the destruction. Buildings reduced to hollow shells, cranes and docks twisted into metal skeletons. The city looked like it had been beaten to death. As they disembarked, processed through military checkpoints, and were finally released into Italy, the full reality hit them with physical force. The streets were filled with people who looked like walking corpses, thin beyond reason, dressed in rags, eyes hollow with hunger and loss. Children begged for food, their small hands outstretched, their faces ancient with suffering. Maria saw a woman, probably her own age but looking 20 years older, sitting on rubble with a baby at her breast, both of them skeletal. The contrast between this and the Arizona camp was so stark, it was obscene. Maria had been eating eggs and bacon for breakfast while this woman starved. The guilt was crushing. They dispersed from Naples, each woman heading to her own destination, her own reckoning with what remained. Maria took a series of trains and then a truck north toward Sicily. The journey that should have taken hours took days because so many bridges were destroyed, so many tracks damaged. When she finally reached her village, she almost did not recognize it. Half the buildings were gone. The church where she had been baptized was a ruin, only one wall still standing. Her family's house, the one in the photograph she had carried across the ocean and back, was partially collapsed, but her parents were alive. They emerged from the damaged doorway when a neighbor shouted that Maria had returned, and her mother screamed and ran toward her, and they collided in an embrace so fierce it hurt. Her father wept, his rough stonemason hands shaking as he touched her face as if to confirm she was real. Her mother pulled back and stared at her, and Maria saw the shock in her eyes. "You are so healthy," her mother whispered, "so strong. We thought prisoners would be starved." And there it was, the impossible truth that would define the reunion. Maria had been a prisoner and had lived better than her free family. She was heavier than when she had been captured, not lighter. Her skin was clear, her teeth intact, her body strong. Her mother was gaunt, her father stooped with malnutrition, both of them aged a decade in 3 years. The reversal of expectations was too much. Her mother began to cry, and Maria did not know if it was joy or grief or the overwhelming complexity of everything they had endured. That night, sleeping on a thin mattress on the floor of what remained of her childhood home, cold and uncomfortable and surrounded by the people she loved most, Maria thought about the bed in Arizona with its clean white sheets. She thought about hot water and coffee with cream and oranges bright as the sun. She thought about Captain Morrison and Corporal Garcia and Mrs. DeMarco. and she felt the full weight of the divide between the life she had just left and the life she had returned to. In the weeks that followed, as she tried to readjust, tried to help her family survive, tried to find work in a shattered economy, Maria told her story. At first, people did not believe her. American prisoners of war camps with abundant food, guards who treated prisoners with respect. It sounded like propaganda, like lies designed to make them feel worse about their own suffering. But Maria was persistent. She showed them the photographs. She described in detail the meals, the routines, the medical care, the English classes, the visits from Italian Americans who brought gifts and kindness. Slowly, reluctantly, people began to accept that she was telling the truth, and the truth was transformative. Because if America, even in wartime, could afford to feed its prisoners so well, could afford to treat even enemies with such dignity, what did that say about American wealth and power? What did it say about the propaganda they had been fed for years, the claims that America was weak and decadent? What did it say about the choices Italy had made, the war it had fought, the ideology it had embraced? The questions were uncomfortable, even dangerous in some circles where fascist sympathies still lingered, but they had to be asked. Other women returned with similar stories. As word spread through villages and cities across Italy, a narrative emerged that complicated the simple story of victors and vanquished. Yes, Italy had lost the war. Yes, the country was devastated. But those who had been prisoners in America had seen something that challenged every assumption. They had seen efficiency and abundance. They had seen democracy in action, informal and chaotic, but functional. They had seen a society where ordinary people lived with dignity and opportunity, where even prisoners ate better than civilians in the defeated nations. Some women could not bear to stay in the ruins. Within a year, Francesca had arranged to immigrate to America. She had maintained correspondence with Captain Reeves, who had helped her navigate the complex immigration process. By 1947, Francesca was living in New Mexico, working as a seamstress, learning to be American. Others followed. Julia eventually made her way to New York, where she worked in a restaurant in Brooklyn and married an Italian-American veteran who had fought in the same war that had made her a prisoner. Anna moved to California, where she picked fruit in the same fields where German and Italian prisoners had worked during the war, but now she was paid fair wages and could build a life. Maria stayed in Sicily. Her parents needed her, and she felt a duty to help rebuild. She found work as a nurse in a clinic established by the Allied occupation authorities, using skills she had maintained and improved in the Arizona infirmary. She married in 1949, a local man who had survived the war and was now working to restore the damaged infrastructure of their region. She had children, raised them in a slowly recovering Italy, told them stories about the war and the strange, transformative time she had spent as a prisoner in the desert. But she never forgot. She wrote letters to Captain Morrison, to Corporal Garcia, to Mrs. DeMarco. The correspondence continued for decades, an ongoing conversation across the ocean. She sent photographs of her children. They sent updates about their lives. When her oldest daughter asked why she kept writing to these Americans, Maria tried to explain. "They gave me back my humanity when I had lost it," she said. "That is not a debt you can repay, but it is one you must remember." The impact of these women's stories extended beyond personal relationships. In the post-war years, as Italy struggled to rebuild and redefine itself, the experiences of the EB prisoners of war became part of a larger conversation about democracy, about economic systems, about values and governance. The Italian government, now democratic, looked to America as a model and as an ally. The Marshall Plan brought American aid and investment. Italian workers learned American industrial techniques. Italian farmers adopted American agricultural methods. And underlying all of it was a recognition, shaped partly by the stories of returned prisoners, that America represented something worth emulating. The symbolic power of the clean sheets never faded. Whenever Maria told her story, she began with that moment, stepping into the barracks, seeing the beds, beginning to cry. It was the perfect encapsulation of the larger truth. The sheets were just sheets, the beds just beds. But they represented a philosophy, a set of values that said even enemies deserved basic dignity. They represented an abundance that was not hoarded, but shared. They represented a confidence so deep that it did not require cruelty to prove itself. In a world that had embraced brutality, that had normalized suffering, that had made efficiency the servant of death, the clean sheets were a radical statement of the opposite possibility. The broader lesson took years to fully understand, but eventually it became clear. The way a nation treats its prisoners reveals its true character. Nazi Germany had built concentration camps and murdered millions. Imperial Japan had brutalized prisoners of war and civilians alike. Even among the Allies, treatment varied. But America, for all its flaws and contradictions, had chosen to follow the Geneva Convention not as a burden, but as a matter of policy and principle. That choice had consequences that extended far beyond the camps themselves. The German and Italian and Japanese prisoners who returned home carried with them stories of American abundance and fairness. These stories undermined decades of propaganda. They planted seeds of doubt about the ideologies that had led to war. They created, in thousands of individual hearts and minds, an openness to American influence in the post-war world. When the United States offered the Marshall Plan, when it positioned itself as the leader of the free world, when it competed with the Soviet Union for influence and allies, the treatment of prisoners during the war was part of its credibility. Small acts of dignity, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of prisoners, became a strategic asset more valuable than any weapon. Maria lived into her 80s. She saw Italy transform from ruins into a prosperous democracy, a founding member of the European Union, an economic success story. She saw her children and grandchildren grow up in a world very different from the one she had known in her youth. And she saw America remain a constant presence in European life, a military ally, an economic partner, a cultural force. The relationship was complicated, sometimes contentious, but fundamentally built on the foundation laid during and immediately after the war. In 1998, when she was 77 years old, Maria received a letter from the United States. It was from the daughter of Captain Morrison, who had passed away the previous year. The daughter wrote that her mother had often spoken about the Italian prisoners she had treated in Arizona, about how brave they had been, how resilient. She was going through her mother's things and had found photographs, letters, and documents related to that time. "Would Maria like to have copies?" Maria wrote back immediately. "Yes, please." When the package arrived, Maria sat at her kitchen table and looked through the materials. There were photographs she had never seen, images of herself and the other women at work, at meals, gathered in the recreation room. She looked young, thin, serious. There were copies of medical records showing her treatment and recovery. There were letters she had written to Captain Morrison over the years, which the doctor had saved. And there was a note written in Captain Morrison's hand, dated 1997, clearly composed near the end of her life. "The Italian women prisoners in Arizona," it read, "taught me something I have never forgotten. Dignity is not a gift we give to those who deserve it. It is a recognition of humanity we extend to everyone, even enemies, even in war, especially then. They arrived expecting cruelty and found kindness. That kindness changed them, but it also changed us. We were reminded that the way we treat the powerless defines who we are. I am grateful to have known them. I am proud of what we did, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was simply right." Maria put the note down, her hands trembling, tears falling on the paper. After all these years, after all the words exchanged, this was the truth they had both understood. The clean sheets had been just the beginning. The real gift had been the daily, consistent, unremarkable choice to treat human beings as human beings. That choice, repeated across thousands of interactions in hundreds of camps, had changed the world in ways both large and small. She thought about the girl she had been, terrified on that truck in the desert night. She thought about the beds that had made her weep. She thought about Captain Morrison's steady hands and Corporal Garcia's guitar and Mrs. DeMarco's fierce embrace and Father Russo's blessing. She thought about all the women who had shared that experience, some still alive, others long gone, all of them marked by those months in Arizona. They had been prisoners who were treated like people. And in being treated like people, they had learned what a society built on respect and abundance could look like. They had carried that knowledge home. They had shared it. They had helped, in their small way, to build something better from the ruins. The beds they cried over became the foundation of reconciliation. Not because the beds themselves were special, but because they represented a choice, a philosophy, a commitment to human dignity that transcended the hatred of war. In a century defined by industrialized violence and systematic dehumanization, that commitment was revolutionary. It suggested that there was another way, a better way, a way that recognized our common humanity even across the deepest divides. The Italian women who experienced it, who lived it, who carried it home in their hearts, became witnesses to that possibility. Their tears over clean sheets were tears of recognition, of relief, of hope. And hope, in the end, was what the world needed most. Hope that we could be better than our worst moments. Hope that kindness was not weakness, but strength. Hope that even from the ashes of total war, a more humane future could be built. The sheets were clean, the beds were made, and in that simple act of preparation, America had shown the world what it aspired to be. Not perfect, not without flaws, but decent. That decency, witnessed by those who had every reason to expect cruelty, became the seed of lasting peace.